It starts tomorrow, but it can start today. It's going to the school so our universities at the university that I used to be sure. That's what he's a sharp well, first, I hope that they what's the first thing they want to know where the thing they want is. Yeah, so it was good at the depot. Pushing carts and heavy stuff. So they're doing that, but you got to know where every little thing that is probably 10,000 things in the store. You got to know where everyone is. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's like all these things that.
Hooray.
Yeah. Really? Which is. He's
She's down there.
Oh, really? He was like right after he dropped out, and he was, he had his guy was smoking.
Vaguely. I forget
The campaign manager was in there. Yeah. Did he not come?
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Morgan State University. I'm Jackie Jones. I'm the Dean of the School of Global Journalism and Communication, and I want to welcome you to the forum sponsored by the Spokesman, the MSU Spokesman, our news organization. It used to be a newspaper, but now it's an online publication that is run by the students in the School of Global Journalism and Communication. And tonight's forum is going to be a discussion with the Republican gubernatorial candidate, Mr. Cox, and Mr. Moore was invited, the Democratic candidate, but he turned down our invitation. So we're going to move forward. Our moderator tonight is one of broadcast news' rising young stars, Antonia Hilton, an NBC News correspondent and a Peabody and Emmy Award-winning journalist reporting at the intersection of politics, civil rights, and immigration across all NBC News platforms. In 2021, Hilton co-hosted the #1 hit podcast, South Lake, with co-host Mike Hbcus. South Lake tells the story of how this idyllic city and its local school board election became the poster child for a new political strategy with national repercussions. The podcast hit #1 on the podcast charts and was named to numerous lists of the best new podcasts of 2021. Hilton is a Pulitzer Prize Award finalist, a Peabody Award winner, Scripps Howard Award winner, and a Deadline Club Award winner for the podcast, among other honors. From 2016 to 2020, Antonia worked for Vice Media and HBO's nightly news and documentary show, Vice News Tonight, and launched a podcast with Spotify, which focused on the 2020 Iowa Democratic Caucus. Antonia has won several additional awards, including an Emmy for her development and reporting of an HBO special episode on the family separation crisis, a Gracie Award for her stories about women, a Namick Vision Award for reporting on violence and politics in Chicago, and 2 front page awards for special reporting and breaking news. When she's not in the field reporting, Antonio mentors other young reporters. So she doesn't sleep, I guess. Please give a warm Morgan welcome to Antonia Hilton.
Thank you for that very, very warm welcome. It is also an honor for me to be here tonight at Morgan State. I'm very excited to be moderating this conversation, but I'm especially excited at the opportunity to work with students here on this campus. Morgan State is one of NBCU Academy's academic partners, and the 3 student panelists who are joining me tonight are fantastic and very impressive journalists, and it's an honor to be able to be in conversation with these women as well. I want to make sure that we make the most of the hour that we have together. So I'm going to jump right into introducing first our panelists and then our guest. So first we have Jordan D. Brown. She's a senior multimedia journalism student at Morgan State. She's been a dedicated member of the Spokesman, Morgan State's student-run news publication, since 2020. She now serves as its editor-in-chief. Trey Mitchell is a senior multimedia journalism major at Morgan State University. Over her 3 years at the Spokesman, she has covered politics, business, arts, and culture. Mitchell now serves as the managing editor. And then next we have Lena Jackson. Lena is a senior at Morgan State, majoring in multi-platform production and music with a concentration in vocal performance. She is the host of the Morgan News Hour on WEAA. Thank you. Yes, give a warm welcome to these 3 student journalists. And last but certainly not least, our guest for the evening. Delegate Dan Cox is the Republican nominee and Trump-endorsed candidate for governor of Maryland and has been representing the 4th District in the Maryland House of Delegates since 2019. Previously, he was the secretary of the Frederick County Republican Central Committee and served as a Frederick County co-chair for the state's Trump Victory Leadership County team. Cox is an attorney and a member of the Maryland Bar. Before getting involved with Maryland politics, he was a high school teacher at Walkersville Christian Family Schools. Today, Cox lives with his wife and children in Frederick County, Maryland. Welcome, Delegate Cox. Squeeze in over here. Thank you so much for making time for this tonight. Great. Let's see if this thing's working. Okay. Thank you again, Delegate Cox, for being here with us and for making time for this important discussion. I want to start by giving you time to make an opening statement of sorts. But before we do that, I want to level set because we're here at Morgan State. It is an HBCU full of Black young students in the heart of a heavily Democratic city. So what is your message and why are you here?
Well, thank you so much, Antonia, and our distinguished panelists and journalists, and to Dean Jones. It's such a privilege that you kept this event on tonight because this is a historic opportunity. It's a historic chance to have an engagement in our republic. Our democratic process is really right here. And why I am here is because, first of all, you as a student body have had the honor to continue this regardless of potential disrespect in my view. But I would humbly submit that I think that we're going to accomplish a lot tonight because hopefully you'll hear a little bit more about me, but most importantly, the importance of your future. So I hope to have that conversation. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Recent NBC News polling has found that nearly 7 in 10 voters say the country is headed in the wrong direction. 6 in 10 say their income is falling behind the cost of living, and majorities feel like the economic and political systems are stacked against them. What are you proposing in this campaign that would bring solutions to those issues?
So this is really why we're running. We're running to restore freedom to Maryland. It sounds like a broad statement. It was intentionally so because we're focused on key areas that we're lacking in. The economy is our #1 concern. Right now, students and young people and families of all backgrounds are being priced out of housing. Affordable housing is becoming a crisis. Our groceries are inflated. Our gasoline is inflated. And one of the issues and reasons this is happening is because the CPI index, the tying of inflation to the assessment value of our property taxes, the tying of inflation to our fuel, all of this creates an inflationary valuation. When I talked to a trucking company, for instance, that supported me, and in the campaign, they said that one of the reasons groceries are going up is because Fuel costs are rising so fast, and so the cost of getting groceries there is an issue. And also our crime issue in our state, we can do better. We can make sure that we have community policing. And then lastly, obviously, we need to make sure that our education is world-class.
Hi, Delegate Cox. Thank you again for being here tonight with us. Our current governor, Republican Larry Hogan, said that he would not vote for you and called you mentally unstable and said that you have, quote, no chance whatsoever, unquote, of being elected governor. In a state where registered Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1, what is your path to victory?
So thankfully, you know, the two that are on the ballot is Westmore and myself, and I humbly ask for your vote. That's what we're focused on. We're focused on the future. We're not focused on name calling and division. We've had enough division. I've had enough division. I come from a lower middle class, blue class background. I drove to college in my 1984 Ford Escort with 200,000 plus miles. I worked 3 jobs to get through college at Mount St. Mary's. I actually ran Division I track, and I got my, self handed to me by some of your guys. So I absolutely understand the struggle that it takes to make yourself better in our state. When you see the problems that we're going through, when you see the economic crises that we're dealing with, the path of the future is not an international lobbyist-supported candidate like Westmore. The path of the future is somebody who's a Marylander who understands and comes from the people and is going to fight for the people. That's who I am, and that's why I believe we're going to win. And our path to victory is through the people's votes. My opponent may have lots of money from his hometown in the Hamptons and Manhattan, but I have the people's support because we're running hard. We're going through every community and saying, it's not about the money. It's about making sure you have your money back in your pocket.
Spell this out for us a little bit. You've accused your opponent, who you mentioned, of being a socialist who believes in more government control. What freedoms are really at stake when you're talking to the students here at Morgan State, but also across Maryland?
So I don't like saying accused. I think there's a policy discussion, and I certainly am concerned, and I'll tell you what some of my concerns are. I will ban on day one the vaccine mandate. I am pro-vaccine, but to go to college and say you can't go to college like many students that I've helped as a state delegate who had simply a question, maybe they had a medical issue, maybe there was a religious exemption issue, but they were being denied entry to class. That's not America, that's not Maryland. But my opponent, he requires, in order to go to some of his events, a vaccine papers. You have to demonstrate that you've taken this. That's not Maryland, that's not our future. Similarly with our issue with taxation. Putting money back in your pockets is the path of the future. And yet right now in an inflation crisis, what do we see? My opponent standing there with the president saying that we need to have this inflationary tax tie-in. I want to eliminate that and say, no, let's reduce our inflation, let's reduce our taxes, make Maryland once again prosperous. And when you look at the policy issues, that's what it is. It's a discussion. How can we put power back to the people? That's what I'm about.
You mentioned freedom, and you've really made a name for yourself in the state in some ways, talking about medical freedom and the right for people to be unvaccinated. How do you square your belief that people have the right to make that decision about their bodies when it comes to a dangerous spreading illness with your belief that women don't have the right to make a choice when it comes to pregnancy?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily squaring with my beliefs. I believe firmly in ensuring that women have access to health care. For instance, I'm very proud of the fact that there are many more women's health care centers and women's opportunities, particularly also with our prenatal and postnatal care centers than abortion clinics. But right now, the issue before us is not so much these moral debates that we've had so long, which everyone knows I'm pro-life. The issue is whether or not we can put food on our children's tables and have an opportunity here in Maryland. We're not seeing that happen.
The number of kids you have is an important, data point when you're factoring all of that in. If you're family planning, is that not part of family budgeting, of understanding how you're going to feed the kids that you have?
Absolutely. And that's why I think that should be left to the family. And isn't it interesting that we're actually having to debate whether or not the government can take charge of our bodies and inject us with something that we might not agree with. Now, as I said, I did my dissertation. I've said this on the campaign trail. I've done my dissertation in law school on the benefits of vaccines and how it has eradicated illnesses. The problem is when you have a government mandate violating the 14th Amendment. I'm a civil rights attorney. I've been fighting for civil rights for 17 years with my own law practice. You can't do that under the law. We already settled this with the prisons. How dare we go and say to those who are not in prison that now you have to be subjected to a forced injection? This is something that we banned, and we need to keep it that way.
You mentioned briefly the decision by families and individuals to kind of make medical decisions for themselves. Circling back to abortion, the right to an abortion has been a state law in Maryland for 3 years now. Why should the government now change that law and start intervening and not let a woman and her physician decide?
So I don't think that's actually what's going on. The recent decision put it back to the states, and as many people know, the state of Maryland is one of the most liberal when it comes to abortion. We have actually an industry that's increasing called abortion tourism right now. It was in the Baltimore Sun mentioned. I'm pro-life. I believe in making access to health care the number one options for women. Particularly, I have 5 women in my household, and my wife and I have understood the importance of access to care. So that's a number one goal that I have. I will always have compassion in that regard. And I absolutely believe that when we come together and talk about these issues, there'll be less division, less animus, and more opportunities to save lives.
I would like to know, what is your stance on Maryland universities like Morgan State potentially offering contraception and birth control options to students?
I think that should be up to the student and the healthcare provider. I don't believe in government handouts. In other words, when you are qualified for a healthcare plan, that should be part of your doctor's and your choice, not something that is forced upon another taxpayer to pay for.
But in your position as governor, is there something that you would change? Would you intervene in that way since, the state funding plays a role in what Morgan State and other schools are able to provide to students or do for them? I mean, the same when it comes to what you've labeled abortion tourism. What exactly would you do?
Well, I think my voting record is clear. I have voted twice at least for expanding funding for HBCUs. In fact, I was one of the few Republicans to do so because I believe firmly in making sure that this university is honored and respected in your budget. And sadly, it's not being honored today by the other leading candidate for governor. So that, I hope, demonstrates my commitment to your budget and to your needs. And I think that that will help us come to the table, make sure that the money needs to be there for the students. Like I said, I have worked 3 jobs to get through undergrad myself. I know how hard it can be to make sure that the healthcare plans are low enough that students can qualify and make sure they have healthcare coverage. All of these things are important, and I will absolutely support them. That does not mean that I'll in any way be negative towards the school or its policies. So I think looking forward, when you look from a pro-life view that I have, it's to help all life. It's to make sure that you have the options that you need to make it happen.
You talk about options. What about women outside of the state who depend on Maryland to access these services? If you become governor, how are you going to handle the state and travelers accessing abortion care?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, we have this debate in the General Assembly. We're one of the only states in the United States that does this. No other state in the area, for instance, we have a $62 billion budget in Maryland, and we can't go as Marylanders to Philadelphia and get health care. But yet we pay for them to be able to come here. We pay for New Jersey. We pay for Delaware. We pay for Virginia. We pay for West Virginia. We pay for Washington, D.C. So I think the issue on the table is taxpayer money. My philosophy says you can do with your money better than what the government can tell you what to do with it. And that's the goal that I'll approach the budget. I'll be looking to see how I can send more money back to your pockets, and I'll give you an example. $2.5 billion right now in surplus in the state treasury. 2.5 billion, and projected to be several billion each year from the next few years. And yet, what are we doing with that? Well, the federal tax credits that was supposed to come back to help young people like yourselves in this university to launch your own business, to have opportunities for you to invest in what you need to invest in, to make sure that you have affordable housing, that money is not coming back to you like most states receive. So instead, it sits in the Maryland Treasury, and politicians in Annapolis are very happy to look at how they might be able to spend that. My approach would be to send it back to you and let you make your choice.
You talk about money circling back into the pockets of minority people. Small businesses around the state drive the economy. Maryland has an office, the Governor's Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs, that commits itself to helping minority business owners. What are your thoughts on this agency, and how do you plan to expand upon it or dissolve it?
Well, I would expand upon it. I think we need to make sure that our minority majority communities have access to bridge loans and capital grants to make sure that they can bring that wealth into the community. Look, this is not about government handouts. It's about hand up. It's making sure that the young man that I played basketball with over in West Baltimore, and after we, had some discussion and chatting, I asked him what was his vision. What could somebody like me try to do to help his dreams? And he told me that he's trying to launch an iPhone videography business to be able to do videos for other businesses and then to be able to capitalize and grow that. In other words, to have an opportunity. And he can't get there because there wasn't this clear opportunity with grants that were available. And I told him about it. So you should look up this office. You should try to connect. But we need to make it more accessible. That would be my approach, and I intend to do that.
Do you think voters of color here in the state of Maryland are going to buy that story? I mean, at a time when you've recently been railing against alleged critical race theory in schools and criticizing districts that have tried to, in their words, make the experience in school, their educational materials more equitable, are minority voters going to see you talking out of that side of your mouth and then this plan, and frankly trust you?
So I'm a very truthful, hopefully, and open person. I mean, you can look at who I've been and what I've done in the legislature, and I don't talk out of two sides of my mouth. One of the things that both my friends and my opponents hopefully agree on is that I'm a straight shooter in terms of what I say is what they understand that I mean, and I'm very, very amenable to making things work. I'm a practical worker. So in 17 years of civil rights laws, I've settled probably 95% civil rights litigation. Probably 95% of my cases have been settled. Why? Because my client was very, very happy. And I have sued the government, I've sued corporations, and I've worked hard for minorities in that capacity. And I have seen success. Why? Because we're the greatest nation on earth. We actually allow us to, through our civil rights laws, to sue our own government. You can't find that in most governments. What I don't like about critical race theory is it doesn't address this issue. I want to teach Black history. I want to teach the history, all the good, bad, and the ugly, because why? America has always risen from ashes to be better. That's what Frederick Douglass said when he said that he sees the injustice, but his hope was the fact that we had a path to fix it because we had this beautiful Declaration of Independence that laid down the principles, and we had the principle that we're all created equal, and then we had the principles of law in the Constitution. That's what I believe, but critical race theory turns that on its head and said we have to eradicate that system that has made us so great, and it divides one against another. So that's my concern, and I think also the larger concern with the different critical theories. You look at gender theory, I mean, this is universally concerning because we are smart enough to love one another and to help students that are struggling with gender identity crises without brainwashing or indoctrinating the entire student body and forcing girls to have to compete in college with persons born as males. That's got to end. And because we're a great people, because we love one another, we have to do better.
I should say for the record, Frederick Douglass also had some scathing critiques of American society that, do you believe teachers should be able to discuss those? I mean, how does that actually play out in the classroom? It sounds like, though, if they don't reflect a vision of America that's ultimately complementary, optimistic, Is that something that needs to be, are you proposing that teachers lose their jobs? That this is something that leads to punishment in public school districts? I mean, when you criticize critical race theory, I think minority communities want clarity on, like, what does this actually lead to? What does it look like?
Sure, critical race theory is Marxism. It's a Marxist ideology that actually divides, and takes out our history. Instead, if you turn it on into an approach that empowers us, and you look at the history of, like, George Washington Carver, for instance, one of my heroes. One of my heroes is George Washington Carver. Why? Came from a very poor background, didn't have anything, worked his way and became a world-renowned inventor and a wonderful person that changed the history of the United States and the trajectory of our minority majority communities, establishing amazing opportunities for education, becoming a powerful voice, even in Washington, D.C., for change. And the issue then, I think, comes to this. Do you want change? Do you want your voice to matter? Do I want my voice to matter? That's what needs to happen, not a tearing down of the Constitution. And when you look at the issues before us, that's my only concern. We don't want to tear down the foundation that we have that actually provides us with the civil rights that we have. And that's all I'm talking about. I want the good, bad, and the ugly to be taught. In fact, I teach it to my kids. When I had the privilege of being a teacher, I taught it. And it's very important when you read the biographies, when you read the autobiographies, when you go through the evidence, when you look at what Harriet Tubman had to go through, my goodness, she had physical impairments, and yet she conquered and saved many lives. This has to be something that we glorify and lift up as a wonderful example for all of us.
I would like to ask, looking at your experience as a teacher, what message do you have to say to public school educators who say that your rhetoric on critical race theory and gender identity have endangered them and make it difficult to treat all their students with respect and equality of class?
Well, I would respectfully disagree. That the rhetoric on the other side, Wes Moore, for instance, says that he wants to not only defund the police, he wants to indict not only individuals, but the system. The problem with that model is it turns communities against the very people that are there to protect them. And you end up with a disaster because now you don't have safety that you need. It also turns on its head the future of America. It turns on its head the opportunities that you and I share. The reason why we have civil rights laws is because we have 400 years of growth, of using the law. And my dad always told me, use it or lose it. The Constitution is not a self-executing document. You get the right to execute it. You get the right to go out there and say, you're not going to trample on my rights because I have the Constitution. And that's what I'm talking about. And that's what I intend to preserve. That's what I'm talking about when I say it's your freedom. And that's what we have to preserve.
Unfortunately, Wes Moore is not here tonight. It would be great to ask him about that, but we have you. And so I think what she's getting at is, teachers have in some cases lost their entire livelihoods over these battles over the last several months, not just in Maryland, but across this country. Superintendents have been pushed out of districts. Parents have said that this rhetoric has made their students afraid, less comfortable in schools. What would you say to a family, for example, family of a transgender child that's supportive of their child's identity? What would you say to them if they told you that what you describe has made their child feel less safe?
Well, I would respectfully disagree, because if we can't have a discussion for the larger good of their own interests and the interests of those who might not see things that way, then we're losing our democracy. We're losing the opportunity to talk. And I would say that absolutely, I will be very, very keen to make sure we have everyone safe. As governor, one of the things that I will intend to make sure is that we bring all the stakeholders to the table and work very hard to make sure teachers and parents have a role in the education. What do we see today? We see Wes Moore, my opponent, actually saying that he wants a centralized approach to education where parents are not going to have their voices heard. I want the exact opposite. Parents have been vilified. They've been called names. We don't need to go there. We need to say parents statistically are shown, whether it's in a gender identity case or in any case, when they are more involved with their children always succeed more. There's more opportunities for that child to succeed. The last thing we want to do is to cut the parents out. So I'm all about making sure we're inclusive in that.
But when you say parents have been vilified, that's not all parents. That's mostly white parents. Many Black parents say that they want their students to learn versions of American history that conservatives have labeled critical race theory. There are lots of LGBTQ families that want their kids to learn about their families, read books in which their families are reflected. Do they not have a right to be at the table?
No, they do. But they don't have a right to force their ideology on those who object. And that's why I
It's a
put the
public
parental.
school. So how does that actually work?
Sure. So I put a bill in called the Parental Rights Act for Maryland. It was supported by over 50,000 moms and dads. It's a very straightforward bill, and some people tried to vilify it, but when you read it, it's very reasonable. It says this, it's a simple concept. If you're a parent and you disagree with this philosophy of transgender ideology from pre-K on up being taught to your child, you have a right to be notified about it. And if you disagree with the curriculum, you have a right to opt your child out. I don't think it has a place in school to be taught. But if a parent wants to do that, they have plenty of opportunities to do that. And I think empowering parents means giving them the notice and opportunity. It's due process in America for that.
But when you say transgender ideology is being taught, do you mean just the acknowledgement that transgender people exist?
Oh, no, look, you can.
Who's teaching transgender indoctrination?
Sure, so Montgomery County just released its curriculum. There's a book that's part of the schools all throughout Maryland called Gender Queer. I can't show you the pictures because in my view and in the view of some law enforcement, it is child pedophilia. It depicts oral sex between men and boys. This is being put in the schools and in the curriculum in Montgomery County. There's very specific diagrams and information telling a child, okay, so my kindergartner is more like interested in being Spider-Man, okay? But telling a kindergartner that if they're a little boy, behind their parents' backs, if they want to be a little girl, they can be that. Now, that's not education. That's indoctrination because it's putting in thoughts in children's minds that parents don't want.
A single book being available that includes characters who represent an identity amounts to indoctrination of an entire population of students?
No, I was including also the general curriculum that's being released. The state board has released guidelines that have to be implemented, and certain counties are implementing those guidelines in ways that are very objectionable to parents.
Can you spell out for me your difference between awareness and indoctrination?
So indoctrination is pretty simple and straightforward. It's whenever you are, for your child, behind your back especially, is forced to believe a certain viewpoint of their gender that you may disagree with, whether for faith values or for other reasons, natural reasons, or whatever it might be. It's not education. Why can't we get back to reading, writing, arithmetic, STEM technologies? This is what makes money. This is what empowers us. Instead, we're having this problem in our Maryland schools that's kind of dividing us, distracting us, and it's created it's like over 200% increase recently in young people questioning their gender identity. I think there's a correlation there. Now, I'm not a scientist and I haven't actually published a result from that, but there is clearly a concern in the parents. And most parents that I talk to on the campaign trail, and I go through all Baltimore City, I go throughout the state of Maryland, Prince George's County, it's nearly unanimous that it doesn't matter your views, they don't want this indoctrination happening behind their backs in the schools.
I would like to shift, if you don't mind, back to your support and commitment to HBCUs. If elected as governor, how do you plan to improve the relationship between the state of Maryland and its 4 HBCUs, Morgan State, Bowie State, Coppin State, and the University of Maryland Eastern Shore?
So I voted for the bills to increase funding for HBCUs because I think it's atrocious and wrong that there was unequal funding. I also believe that the funding is not enough because the other schools tend to have proper infrastructure upkeep funding. And yet our HBCUs don't seem to have the same levels. Now there can be a debate on that, but it seems like there's a gap. So I'd like to see that made up. But most importantly, this, I come from a lower middle class background, like I said. I understand how hard it is for lower middle class background young people to be able to graduate and get that degree. It took me 10 years to get my degree. And I worked like everything to get it done. It was hard. I worked 3 jobs at times, and then my wife helped me finish up when we were newlyweds. And I can tell you, that's what our young people are facing at HBCUs because they don't have the capital. And as a delegate, I see a lot of students across my county and across the state that apply for college. And they apply for the college scholarships with the delegates and senators. And the capital that's flowing into the other schools is amazing. It really is amazing. The families tend to have much more resource access. Not so with our HBCUs. And so to say that there's equality of funding when they're just barely making it with the Pell Grant, I don't think is a proper picture. I got through college with Pell Grants. I know how hard it is to pay that bill because the Pell Grant doesn't cover it. And that's why I think you're seeing the HBCU students have one of the higher dropout levels from college, because it's not that they don't want the degree. It's because it's so hard to attain that with making those payments. So I think we need to look at that very carefully. And I have pledged to always make sure that we back that and make sure that our students have the resources they need, empowering them, whether it's through work study, whether it's through increased federal work study, whether it's through increased grants, making sure that you have the opportunity to get your degree and have a job from that degree. And I think there's another topic, looking at the rates of education costs and the lack of correlation to good paying jobs after you get your degree is another issue we need to look at.
Why has your party had so much trouble making inroads with a population like the one at this school?
You know, I think we don't show up enough. The Republican Party is the party of Martin Luther King Jr. It's the party of Frederick Douglass. It's the party of Harriet Tubman. They were all Republicans. And yet today, especially since maybe President Johnson, I think, we don't show up. And that's wrong. That's why I'm here today. I think we can do better.
I want to go back to national politics. You've called the 2020 election stolen. You had an account on Gab, a website known to welcome white supremacists. And you called Mike Pence a traitor as rioters at the Capitol were calling for him to be hanged on January 6th. Why should people believe that you're fit to be governor?
Because all of those are misrepresentations of my record. I have never intentionally called anyone names knowing that somebody else was doing something that's criminal. That's an issue. I was very concerned about that. It's been a smear against me. Certainly I can do better with my tweets, and I've sought to do so. It's not reflective of my heart and intent. The other thing is, when you look at the issue with the election, this is a bipartisan issue. In Frederick County, for instance, this year, the decertification, so our election was certified in Frederick just last month. The young lady, African-American young lady, won by 1 vote. They then decertified the election and took her win away and gave it to the incumbent because of alleged fraud. Now, I didn't get involved in understanding whether there was what the truth of that was, but I think it just reflects that this is a bipartisan need, that we have transparency and we have integrity in our election process. And that's why, as a delegate, I demonstrated this. I worked across the aisle with my Democrat colleagues on an issue that I thought was important. That was and this came out of some of my experiences as an election lawyer, which, by the way, I have served for 17 years as a civil rights lawyer. And then I also have volunteered from time to time, standing side by side with the ACLU at election polling places, making sure people have the right to vote and that those issues are protected. In the audit process, and this is where I was able to work across the aisle and get this done or see it advance. The Maryland law used to say that you could not audit an election if you were challenging it as a candidate until after the certification of the winner happened and the person was seated. So that just had the cart before the horse. So I put a bill in to switch it and say, no, if you have a contested election, let's make sure we audit the issue before you certify the winner. That way you're not actually pulling back the win from someone. Well, my Democratic colleague, chairwoman agreed. She put that in. That was something that she'd also believed in. And my understanding is she got it done, and I supported that.
Did you organize buses to the riot on January 6th?
No, this is another misnomer. So this has been widely reported. It's a falsity. What I did do was I bought tickets for my children. I had 7 children. We went to hear something that all of us from, time immemorial have gone to DC to enjoy, and that is to hear our government leaders speak. So I took my kids and I was able to go there, and we heard the president speak from the White House lawn. And then, things began to be in such a way that I had to get back to the bus. I didn't like what was appearing to go on, so we left. So I never left the mall. But I can tell you this, the whole busing thing, I would say this, why is it that the media likes to ask me about the 7 tickets that I bought for my children, but doesn't ask questions about Jamie Raskin, who buses people to protests quite frequently? Jamie Raskin said the 2016 election was a fraud. He voted to decertify the electors, and yet nobody talks about that.
Delegate Cox, I think it's a little interesting that you say that, because in the past you tweeted, I am co-hosting 2 buses to the Million MAGA March/rally with the Frederick County Conservative Club in support of President Trump at Real Donald Trump on January 6, 2021 to #StopTheSteal. So I think it's important that we ask you again, did you or did you not provide financial or logistical support to those who traveled to the January 6th riot?
Absolutely not. And let me explain. First of all, it was a rally, like I said, to hear the President of the United States speak. Secondly, when I said that I was co-hosting, what they did was they said, Delegate Cox is going to ride on the bus with his kids. And so I helped, tweet that out. But in terms of hiring buses and all that, no. I bought tickets. I did do that. But you have to remember, too, that none of this, at least from my perspective, I had no knowledge that this was going to end up the way it did. This was very unfortunate. I have called for the prosecution of those who were breaking and busting into the Capitol and hurting our police or whatever that was happening. I was very concerned, very upset with that. And I stand with all America to condemn that. Always have. So, no.
So I just want to clarify, by co-hosting, you meant me and my kids are going to ride one of these 2 buses to the march with other rioters that day. Is that what you mean?
That's what we did, and yes, that's what we meant. That's what I meant.
Does that constitute logistical support? I mean, in what does co-hosting mean?
So it's an interesting line of questioning. Certainly, we could discuss what is logistical support. I can tell you this, a wonderful event of hearing the President of the United States speak was something that it wasn't even a question as to whether it would be a concern. And in terms of logistical support, buying tickets is not a logistical support in my view, but I did buy tickets and took my children. Why? If we lose the right to go to our Capitol and to hear the president speak and to take my children along and hear that, we're losing a fundamental liberty. We can't let that go, regardless of the politics afterwards.
I don't think anyone disputes that you had the right to be there. I think it's a fair line of questioning because you stated that you didn't, but there was a tweet that has made serious confusion.
I've never said I wasn't there listening to the president.
No, I know you said, but you said that you did not organize buses to the January. You just said that to us a moment ago.
That's right.
But your tweet makes that a bit confusing. So I think it's a fair line of questioning to make sure that a candidate for governor is giving his constituents a straight answer.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, in a letter that you wrote to the General Assembly's Ethics Committee after that, you said you had no realization of the gravity of the situation. When you look back at it now, do you understand the gravity of the situation? Do you regret attending at all?
Absolutely. The gravity was horrific, and I've made that clear as well. I think it's a travesty. It's not how we do our republic. It's wrong.
I think it begs the question, are you willing to accept the outcome of this election?
So let me turn it on this way and just ask you, as a body politic, you have a sacred thing. It's called a vote. I take your sacred vote so seriously that I have stood as an election attorney, like I said, with the ACLU by my side, making sure that the rules were followed, making sure that people that had questions could hopefully have answers. And we did it in a bipartisan way. I enjoyed the process. And, you know, in the context of looking at our election integrity laws, is there sometimes issues that need to be fixed? Yes, that's what I believe in firmly. And so when you look at the election, I have always embraced and respected election outcomes. I have won elections, I've lost elections. I intend to win this one, so there's not going to be an issue. But even if I lose, I can tell you very, very clearly, I believe in the system. I believe very firmly in making sure that our system works. I don't believe in changing the rules midstream. I don't believe in making a system that creates question. I don't believe in losing our chain of custody with our mail-in ballots. I don't believe in failure to assert and verify that it's actually voters voting. These are issues that all diminish our sacred right to vote that I intend to always stand for, win or lose.
I wanted to transition from the violence that occurred on January 6th. There were a lot of people across the country and specifically in the state of Maryland that were armed that day. And I would like to ask, what is your plan to stem the influx of guns around the state of Maryland?
So I co-sponsored a bill, I believe. I know we strongly supported it in committee, and I've co-sponsored that package because I was on the governor's crime task force to make sure that when a gun is used in a felony, we prosecute it, and we have minimum mandatory sentences for that. Right now, you can shoot somebody up in Baltimore, and you can be out on the street again. It's called a revolving door. I fought against that. That's a problem. But sadly, the approach of my opponent is not to support that, to allow guns to continue, illegal guns to continue to flood our streets. I intend to crack down on that. Why? Because lives matter. We can't allow this to happen. Our kids are going to be hurt. And they are being hurt. Every day almost we see another child. Just like last week I saw a 16-year-old young lady who was shot. This has got to end. The illegal guns flowing into Baltimore City is a key problem, but not just Baltimore City. We're seeing it across the state now. And with the rise in fentanyl, we've got to make this a priority. I intend to do that.
Well, Maryland's firearm mortality rate is actually pretty low relative to the firearm mortality rate of many states with looser gun laws like Wyoming, Alabama, and Georgia. If elected governor, do you have a plan to keep Maryland's firearm rate low in comparison to the rest of the country while also staying with your pledge to ensure our constitutional rights enforced?
Yes, absolutely. We can do better. I think when you look at our system, like I mentioned, we have a revolving door issue. We have an illegal gun issue that's rampant. You look at the cartels that very much control some of our sectors of the state. We have to crack down on that. And when you see that we're now pushing over 300 murders for this year, and that's like the 4th or 5th year in a row, we have got to do better immediately. And when you see the NAACP calling for help, crying out for help, saying, please send in the National Guard, it took me by surprise. So that shows that our elected officials are needing to step up. I intend to do that.
So what exactly is your plan for you to step up and keep our mortality rates low?
So number one, we're going to make sure we bring the stakeholders to the table immediately. By the way, that's a great question. Right now, we do not have a prosecutorial system in place that actually puts people behind bars. Now, I'm very excited and hopeful that the new state's attorney in Baltimore City that was recently elected, he has issued statements of a plan. Basically, in my general thought of it is it's a really good no-nonsense plan. I hope it works. I pray for his success because he's going to save lives if it works. I intend to support him in that. But I also intend to make sure the resources are there from the state of Maryland as requested. But when we have an issue where it's not being handled right, I think the state has an obligation to protect each one of us. When I was in West Baltimore with the E. coli issue, and we saw the problem with that issue, many people surrounded me and said, we have an issue. Look at this phone. Look at the video of people twitching and dying on the streets from fentanyl, people being shot up on the streets. And yet, like I mentioned earlier, you call the police and they do not show up. It's not the police's fault. It's because they're down about 1,200 officers. I intend to change that, make sure we boost that program, make sure our officers are back in place. And the way you do that is you make sure that they understand that they're going to have the world-class training they need, the equipment they need, and the backing that they need from the state of Maryland, so that they're not feeling like they're left out in the cold and they don't even know if they can complete their jobs safely.
You talk about drug use and fentanyl, but I want to ask you about marijuana. Maryland voters will make a choice on a ballot initiative to legalize marijuana for adults over the age of 21. Should adults have the freedom to consume marijuana in the state, or is the issue, you agree, government control over people's lives necessary?
So I'm a strong advocate for health choice, health privacy, and making your own personal decisions. I specifically was concerned with the way this law was presented because it did not have adequate protections, excuse me, for our communities. There were some issues, particularly I worked hard in committee, for instance, to decriminalize plants. So my chairman, God bless him, added in a provision, from my understanding, it was his provision, after I had this question rise, why are we putting people in jail for growing a couple marijuana plants? This is ridiculous. This is a way that individuals can make sure that if they have a marijuana card or if it's legalized, they don't have to be out there endangering themselves with something that could be fentanyl laced. Thankfully, that got put in there. Very supportive of that. That was something that I think, I pride myself that I asked those questions in committee. The problem is, I don't think the children protection, the child protection is quite there, and I don't think we have everything in place yet. For instance, we had testimony in my committee that said there's no test if someone is driving erratically under the influence. There's zero ways to protect civil rights. So you could have someone wrongly accused to be under the influence, arrested, and yet there's no test to protect them to say, no, I wasn't. And vice versa. You could have somebody that is erratically driving and hurt somebody, but there's no way to prosecute that person for breaking the law because there's no test yet. So I think we can improve those areas, and that was, I think, my general concern. But I tend to be much more open to these issues because I've actually witnessed and seen how the THC can help people, particularly with Parkinson's, and it's much, much better than putting that person necessarily on expensive drugs that may not have the best secondary effects.
If the measure to legalize marijuana use for adults over 21 passes in Maryland, what would you do as governor with the tax revenue generated from the sale of cannabis?
Well, I'd like to see it come back to education. It really needs to come back to education. I think when you look at when we passed the gambling bills and legalized that the whole idea was there was going to be a lockbox for education. Well, we haven't quite seen that work out the way it should. So I intend to work hard to make sure that we bring everybody to the table, that we have equality in the permits. That's another issue that needs to happen. We need to make sure that we're not picking and choosing favorites. Somebody donated a lot to somebody's political campaign and all of a sudden they get the permit. That's wrong. I'm going to end that. We're going to look instead at making sure that the tax revenue goes back to the community and helps our education system. That's the intent. Obviously, we have to work through the laws and make sure we're following the law in that respect.
You mentioned this a moment ago, so I want to circle back. This past Friday, a judge ruled that election workers would be able to count mail-in ballots early in anticipation of a high volume of mail-in ballots coming in and potential delays that could come with all that. You just filed an appeal. Walk us through that decision.
So I support early counting. The problem is I stand with the governor who vetoed the bill because there were not adequate protections in place. And particularly my concern is we're midstream. We're literally 42 days out from the election. And with 42 days out from the election, one way to create confusion is to change the law midstream. And I'm not even opposed to changing the law if we do it constitutionally. So one thing you know about me, and my colleagues will know about me, is that I firmly believe in following the Constitution and the laws. In other words, it's our civil rights at stake. When you have one person overriding the governor, with all due respect, he was a very brilliant judge. I respect his decision. He did a very thorough analysis. It was second to none and classy, but it was, in my view, erred on the fact that he had no jurisdiction or authority to veto the governor's veto. Only the legislature can override the governor, and the legislature chose not to do so. So that's the Constitution. Why would we deviate it from it? Well, the answer to that is there was an alleged emergency. The problem with that is we've known for a year now that we'll have 500,000 or more ballots for mail-in. So where's the emergency? This isn't a concern. We made it through the primaries okay. Yes, okay, so there was one race in Montgomery County that took 3 weeks. I think they survived. I think undermining the Constitution, the process, is more of a concern. And I think we need to make sure we do it right.
I think the emergency comes from the possibility that election workers will struggle, perhaps in unprecedented ways, to count these ballots, and that those delays could end up meaning they miss legal deadlines. By potentially blocking this, does that not sow possibly more confusion or doubt in this election? If voters are confused as to why election workers are spending days trying to get through this, is that not going to make them concerned?
Absolutely not. I mean, again, like I said, I think the laws should have been fixed better, faster, and through the legislative process. But Governor Hogan vetoed it because he had serious concerns with these issues, and everyone knew that this could be an issue. We'd already gone through the pandemic years. With the 2020 election, we saw similar huge influxes of ballots. So we knew this was an issue. But yet they decided to kick it down, to punt on this issue. That's their right as a legislature. That's a body that I'm a part of still. I believe firmly in the separation of powers. And when you look at the concern, all of them are easily remedied with simply hiring the number of people needed to get it done. I think we can do that. We're smart people. We don't need to go through a process that upends the constitutional order to do that.
How should Republicans and Democrats come together in Maryland after the election? And what are some of the issues where politicians in both parties can agree to get something done for voters in Maryland?
That's my heart. We have to come together. This is my future. These are my children with a vision and dream. These are your dreams. The way we do that is we say, let's resolve things practically. Let's stop the name calling. Let's go forward with a sense of urgency to resolve the issues in front of us. We have clear issues in front of us. Undeniable issues with the economy, affordable housing, rising grocery prices. People are right now moving out of state because they can't afford to stay in Maryland, this beautiful state that we own, that we have. Number two, crime. My goodness, we can do better than this. We look around the country, we have some of the highest murder rates, not only in the country, but in the world in Baltimore City. This has got to end. It's taking precious lives. Third, our education system is an urgency right now. Baltimore City, I don't need to go into all the details of those issues, but as a legislator, I've been briefed on some of the concerns in Baltimore City. We have individuals that have rubber-stamped young people without giving them the Article 8 guaranteed education that the Constitution gives them. Article 8 of the Constitution of Maryland requires the school system to give a real education to our students. A world-class education is not being provided them at all, sadly. And it's not just Baltimore City, it's across the state. We can do much better. And these are the things that unite us, because when we come to the table to resolve them, there are issues that we can talk about and say, let's be honest here. We have to deal with these things or else people are going to be hurt. People are just going to move. Like in the last 9 years, 250,000 Marylanders net moved out of this state, whether it's an economic problem they had, whether it's the schools that are failing their kids, or whether it's the fact that the crime is scaring them. We've lost those Marylanders. We need to make sure we turn that around. We can do it.
I think we have only a few short moments left. And so I want to make sure that we get to a video question that a student has submitted for you.
Last week,
What are you planning on learning
Do you want to introduce this question? Because, you know, their team went out and has spoken to students on campus who maybe couldn't make it here tonight and has spoken to some folks. So I think they have at least one they want to share with you.
yes, so last week, members of the Spokesman asked Morgan State students what questions they would like answered from the next governor of Maryland. And the final question of the night will come from Morgan State student Zion Williams.
the restoration and the preservation of historic communities as well as the abandoned communities in Baltimore and outside of Baltimore?
So I had trouble hearing some of the question. I didn't hear I think restoration of communities is what I heard, but I didn't hear the last part, as well as some particular, did anybody?
What are you planning on learning to the restoration and the preservation of historic communities as well as the abandoned communities in Baltimore and outside of Baltimore?
So I heard restoration of our communities, our historic communities.
Historic communities as well as abandoned communities here in
Abandoned,
Baltimore.
thank you. Okay, my hearing wasn't as sharp. Thank you. So we have an issue right now. I'm working with various groups that want, one of them is called Build, one of them is called Rebuild. I've met with them. There's one out of Prince George's called Plan. These are nonprofits that have a vision to rebuild our communities. They're doing great work. They're doing it block by block, because when you take a city block and you rehab it, you refab it, you take those houses and you're able to improve the entire neighborhood, improving the parks, improving the streets, and providing an opportunity for low-income housing in a brand-new structure. We have to do this in all of our communities in Baltimore City. I had the privilege as a civil rights attorney and as a lawyer in East Baltimore with my partner, where I worked for 3 years near the CVS over there near the east, about a mile from the Eastern District Courthouse, to try to stop a history of redlining called ground rent. And I have been fighting that issue. I fought for over 3 years on some of these issues. We have got to modernize our system and our deeds to eliminate this ancient practice, this old practice that really takes power away from the owner and keeps it in the ownership of the ground in somebody that lives in Massachusetts or something, never shows up in Baltimore. I want to change that around, empower our communities like the Build program to take these blocks back street by street. And I know that many governors have promised this, and sadly we see it very slowly progressing. But I have a history of working in this. It is something that I strongly believe in. It's something, as someone who built 2 houses myself over the years because I didn't have money to buy one, I firmly believe in making property ownership a dream and a vision for every young person and family, because that's the path of equity. That's the path of opportunity.
Thank you, Delegate Cox.
Thank you, Antonia.
This was a really fascinating discussion, and as you mentioned at the outset, it's not necessarily the type of discussion that HBCUs get to host with, Republican candidates all the time. And so we appreciate you making the time to be here to engage, not just with me, but with an entire group of students here. It's really great to have you.
It's quite an honor. Thank you. You're brilliant. It's great that you were willing to host this, to continue it, that you and your team came to create this wonderful opportunity. Thank you to the school, Morgan State, and to the dean. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm asking for your vote. This is your moment. Put power back in the people's hands. Give me a chance. Thank you so much.
Thanks to all of you for being here tonight. That concludes our forum. Thank you again, Candidate Cox, and thank you to our fabulous student journalists. We so appreciate you. I'm gonna put this back before I drop it. I don't want to break this thing.
You guys did great. Fantastic. Good girl. That's great. Thank you. Good job. Thank you. Appreciate your.
Can we get you all together for a picture? Of course.
Great job, guys. You did all fantastic job.